I'm starting a new series of videos called That's Not What My Bible Says, Why Translations Differ. I will answer your questions about specific passages. I'll also weigh in on questions I spot on social media. The King James Version that I have right here will come up, but this series isn't about King James onlyism per se. The point is helping people know why Bible translations differ when they do. There aren't an endless set of reasons, but when I see people speculating fearfully online, and again, I'm not talking just about my King James only brothers, they often show that they could use a little help discerning what's really going on. Each video is going to start with weak or bad answers and move, to the best of my ability, to good ones. I've spent 20 years comparing Bible translations nonstop. I have dug into the theory of Bible translation. I actually have a brand new book, just a little one, introducing bibliology to people. I've been involved in various ways in Bible translations projects, one that's actually in print and one that's still on the drawing board. And perhaps most importantly, I just live in the same world that the Bible translators live in. These are the best ways I know of to figure out accurately what these translators are thinking, because they usually can't tell us directly. The Net Bible has translation notes, but basically no one else does. I'll be your Net Bible notes for all major evangelical English Bible translations. Let's jump in. The first question I'll handle comes from Facebook. I won't show the comment because I don't want to embarrass the person who made it. But he raised a good question even if he gave an answer that we're going to find wanting. Why does Luke 17:37 say eagles in the King James Version and vultures in nearly all modern translations? Here's the King James. And they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord? They're asking about the judgment he's talking about. And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. Here's the NIV. Where, Lord? They asked. He replied, Where there is a dead body, there the vultures will gather. The commenter argued that the King James was right and all the modern translations were wrong. He appealed to two authorities, Google Translate and an internet article about the nature of eagles. Google Translate did translate the relevant word as eagles, not as vultures, and the article he found showed that eagles are indeed carrion birds like vultures. So he concluded, so apparently where the body is, there the eagles will indeed be gathered after all. And instead of the King James being the only Bible that got it wrong, it turns out it was the only one that got it right. Is this commentator right? We're going to come back over and over to certain principles in this series, Lord willing. Here's one. When two Bible translations put together by trained and skillful Christian people differ, I encourage Bible readers to assume that each group of translators had good reasons for the choice they made. Bible translators can do boneheaded things just like the rest of us can, but it's pretty rare in my experience that they do something that's simply and clearly wrong. The major evangelical English translations going back to the King James and beyond were done by committees. Multiple eyes looked at each verse. When you find a difference and you assume that one translation must be wrong and the other must be right, you usually miss out on an opportunity to learn something about language, something about the passage, something about theology, or even textual criticism. And think about what people who do this are doing. Those who fire off big wrong bullets at English Bible translations are lifting themselves up above dozens of translators who made a different choice, often without really bothering to figure out why they made that choice. I see this all the time, and it really saddens me. Proverbs 18:13 ought to be written over countless social media discussions of translation differences. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. Now let's talk through the authorities this commenter appealed to. I think one appeal, the second, was good, and one, the first, was bad. Let's start with the bad one. Simply put, Google Translate is not designed to tell us what words in ancient Greek meant. It's keyed to modern Greek, which may or may not be the same as Koine Greek in any given case. Language changes over time. Just because a word means something in modern Greek doesn't mean it meant that in ancient Greek. Just because someone says he's gay today doesn't mean that someone in the 1890s who described himself as gay meant the same thing. The word has changed. And if you say, well, it shouldn't have changed, English is going down the tubes, you just know this doesn't work. You will never again use the word gay to mean happy or jolly, because the language has moved on, and you don't get to define the language. No single human does. There is a reason that certain tools like the BDAG lexicon that have risen to the top in the esteem of careful students of the New Testament. And in this case, BDAG does a lot of careful homework to show that the Greek word here in Luke 17 can be translated eagle or vulture, depending on the context. BDAG bothers to show that Pliny, many centuries ago, classed the vulture among the eagles. In other words, in our culture's taxonomy, vultures are not classed among the eagles, but in Jesus' time they were considered to be so. The Greek word ends up being a bit more general than ours. In technical terminology, its extension is larger. It's a more general word than our word for eagle. It can encompass eagles, kites, or vultures. Capable people I've read have suggested that even in Hebrew, when God says he brought Israel out of Egypt on eagle's wings, he was probably referring to a particular kind of vulture that was well known by people in Israel and considered noble. Therefore, Greek doesn't map onto English perfectly here in Luke 17. Translators are forced by English to make a choice, to choose a bird. Elsewhere in the New Testament, they do choose eagle to render this same word because the noble and powerful eagle works well in those contexts for English speakers, like in Revelation 12:14, when the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness. The 2 wings of the great vulture brings up a very different cultural resonance. This is something translators have to take into account. Though formal translations, often called literal, like the King James, tend to ask the reader to come into the world of the text, it's okay if you make the journey a little easier by picking a bird name that your readers will already know and will think of as the original readers of the Old Testament and New Testament did when that particular word was used. So, in the context of Luke 17:37 and also Matthew 24:28, which contains the same obscure proverbial saying from Jesus, where the carcasses are, there the X will be gathered together. It does seem to demand not a noble bird, but a nasty one. An eagle is a carrion bird, so it does work in this passage, and this is where the good appeal in the commenter's post was. He went looking for whether eagles eat carrion, and he found what looked to me to be a reliable authority showing that eagles do in fact consume carrion. But vulture, in our culture and language, says this more clearly. We associate eagles with nobility. They're always looking shrewdly off into the future with furrowed brow. But vultures we associate with the dirty work of flocking to dead animals. Again, I'm fine with either rendering, though I tend to prefer vulture for the reasons that I've mentioned. But I don't think the King James translators were wrong, even though my beloved and respected commentator D.A. Carson specifically says that they were in his otherwise excellent commentary on Matthew. If you were expecting me to say that eagles is a false friend in the King James, I can find no evidence that it is. Eagle pointed to the same birds in 1611 that it points to today. But I can defend eagle as a valid choice because translation is not an exact science. It requires weighing lots of factors. This is an obscure and even enigmatic passage, and I want to make a point that I find myself thinking of frequently when I read the words of Jesus. He chose regularly to say things that are obscure. Sometimes he did this, Matthew 13 tells us, because he actually wanted to hide the truth from people and reveal it to others. But sometimes he's just God. His thoughts are higher than ours, and he's speaking for the Father, as he claims repeatedly, and he gets to choose the level of clarity he provides. Jesus in Luke 17, no matter the translation, is talking about the time when the Son of Man will be revealed. Quite apparently, in judgment. 2 will be in one bed, one will be taken, the other left. And the disciples don't ask why or when or who. They ask where. And Jesus tells them, where there is a dead body, there the vultures will gather. That doesn't exactly answer the question, not clearly, right? And again, I'm saying Jesus is allowed to do this. He's allowed to redirect people. What he leaves me with is a general sense that something foreboding is coming. All this talk of dead bodies and carrion birds is not meant to create an optimistic and hopeful picture. For some people, at least, the revealing of the Son of Man will be a terrible time. Now that I sit down again to think about this passage that I've read so many times in 2 different Gospels, I see it as communicating generally that judgment will be visible all over the place. Where? Everywhere. And it's not going to be hidden or limited to one locale. Those vultures will be swarming all over the planet on that day. The Bible uses carrots and sticks, promises of blessing and threats of judgment to alter human behavior. Though that's not all it uses, it also teaches the grace and the sovereignty of God, which cuts carrots and sticks in half. This passage, however, is a stick. Don't get hung up on the precise identity of the birds, calling one translation right and the others wrong. not when the Greek word doesn't map with precision onto English, and not when the passage itself is somewhat obscure. Remember, too, what the King James translators themselves said. They said it about Hebrew, not Greek, but it's a reminder generally that translation from one language into another often involves complications when it comes to real-life objects that one culture has and another doesn't, or real-life animals that are customarily divided into taxonomies a little differently by the culture and or the language. Listen to this. There be many words in the Scriptures, which be never found there but once, having neither brother nor neighbor, as the Hebrews speak, so that we cannot be helped by conference of places. In other words, they can't look to see how the word is used elsewhere. Again, there be many rare names of certain birds, beasts, and precious stones, etc., concerning which the Hebrews themselves are so divided among themselves for judgment that they may seem to have defined this or that rather because they would say something than because they were sure of that which they said, as St. Jerome somewhere saith the Septuagint. Jerome was the translator of the Latin Vulgate in the 4th century. Now, in such a case, doth not a margin do well to admonish the reader to seek further, and not to conclude or dogmatize upon this or that peremptorily? Dogmatizing peremptorily is an accurate description of so much discussion of Bible translation on Facebook. The King James translators absolutely nailed it there. And what were they really encouraging you to do? They were encouraging you to go look at the margins. So the next time you are sitting in a Bible study and someone pipes up, "That's not what my Bible says," someone should go to the Bible.org site and look at the margins. Look at the Net Bible. It frequently has good notes in the margins on questions just like this. And here it takes one paragraph to say what took me a whole obsessive video. The same Greek term can refer to eagles or vultures, but in this context it must mean vultures because the gruesome image is one of dead bodies being consumed by scavengers. So, don't dogmatize peremptorily. Start with the presumption that the translators of each Bible you're looking at had some good reason for what they did. And go checking in the margins somewhere. Use whatever tools you have access to that are reliable online or wherever to find out why a given translation differed from another. Or just subscribe to my YouTube channel.